All right, welcome everyone. We are doing a Ask the Expert session with some of our experts today, coming from the Adobe teams here, scattered across the nation, if you will. I'm over on the West Coast. We got some folks over on the East Coast. It's a little late for us, so might be a little dark in the background, but bear with me while I go through some housekeeping items for a second. So you are joining the Ask the Expert session. So we have specifically chosen some of our industry experts to answer some questions that you might have around the Microsoft partnership with Adobe, or just maybe some general questions with Adobe. Anything that you want to ask, we can field those questions. If we move to the how to engage with the experts, a couple housekeeping items here as well. Use the chat pod to ask some questions. Questions will appear to all attendees once approved by the moderator. You can upvote some of the questions if you see a question that you like and you'd like to hear an answer as well, so we can get some likes there. Again, our experts are going to be fielding these questions, and we're going to answer them live. We have some people in the background typing out answers as well, and then we're going to provide some resources once the session concludes and to learn more. Moving forward, some etiquette. This session is going to be recorded. Help our moderators, do not spam or post inappropriate comments in the chat pod, please. And then adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct, which we'll show you right now. So this has already been published. This is just, I guess, kosher to show this to everyone, but this has been published. Everyone has seen this. So we can go ahead and move forward and introduce our experts. So I am very excited today to welcome Lori DeFurio, the queen of Acrobat. She's a principal PM lead for us here at Adobe. She's been with us for over 20 years. I can't tell you how much I've learned from this woman. She is a wealth of knowledge. And then we also have James Lockman, who's a senior manager for our customer solutions, joining us from Maine. He manages our premium onboarding teams. He has a wealth of knowledge on implementation, migration, all of that stuff. And then again, I want to welcome Ben Vanderberg as well, my close friend and colleague. He's one of our senior technical product marketing managers, also evangelist on the side, but he knows everything there is under the sun with Microsoft and Adobe, some of the solutions that we're working with and integrations and all of that good stuff. So with that being said, we're going to pause, open up the Q&A, and see if anyone has any questions right off the bat. Okay, so Job had posted the code of conduct. Thank you. Okay, here's one. If you go over your FTE numbers, full-time employee numbers during the year, do you have to do an amendment to the contract, or is there a true up at the end of the year? Who wants to take that one?
I'll take it if you want.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lori.
So basically, when you have a contract with Adobe, and typically for most of the folks on this call, it's called an Enterprise Term License Agreement, ETLA. You might also actually have what we call a VIP, a Value Incentive Program. But if you have the ETLA, the way it's written is that you can just eat all you need for the year, install as many seats as you need to. Clearly in this remote environment, there's a lot more that has to go on with any of the technologies, Acrobat, Creative, Stock, Adobe Sign, whatever you've licensed on your contract. And at the end of your year, which we call your anniversary, there's called a true up, and then it's a part written into the contract to then say, well, okay, this is how much we used, and you basically back pay for it, and then that's your new baseline moving into the next year in your contract.
Excellent, thank you, Lori. Okay, here's one. We are on continuous track using Adobe Cloud, and we would like to have users that are now using VMware not to need to sign in to Acrobat DC Pro to be licensed to the VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure. How can we go about that? That was a mouthful, but did we get that?
So the question is, I have a whole pile of people, but I don't want them to have to sign in when they're moving around in virtual machines, right? or
Yeah.
virtual desktop.
You want me to just read it? I can read it again.
Okay.
We are on the continuous track using Adobe, and we would like to have our users that are now using VMware not to need to sign into Adobe Acrobat DC Pro and be licensed to the VDI or virtual desktop infrastructure. How do we go about that?
So with continuous, that is tied to a named user. And so the user will have to log in to Acrobat or to Document Cloud to be able to use the features of Acrobat or Document Cloud. It is possible to, let's see, if I want to limb here. With the virtual desktops, if you do a roaming folder, that might work for the licensing. Ben, what do you think? If they use the roaming home folder?
That might work. I'd have to check to validate that, but I believe that could work for that. Although I'm not exactly sure on that.
You know, I was going to just say, I think the catch to the whole thing, and James, you called it out, is it's about the name. When you're moving into the login environment, you got to log in. I mean, that's the thing. If you're, legacy, sort of old school, using the serial number, sure, you just walk up to the device and it could be on, right? But in this new world of where we log in everywhere we go, it's just not a viable solution, I think. And maybe you're right. Maybe the roaming will work, but I think, people by default, you got to think to yourself, they got to log in.
And just think about the fact that the Adobe license is separate from the Microsoft license. So you do have to validate that you have a license to use Adobe products and services in order to use them. And that's where we have the login.
Thank you, guys. Okay. Here's a good one. How do we know on which computers a user has consumed an Acrobat license? Do those age out if there's no activity? Like if no one's using these licenses, do they go away?
That's great. So in the named user world, the computer isn't where the license is. The license is with the user. So wherever the user logs in, that is where the license is. However, that license isn't there permanently. If a person now goes and logs in on another computer, they can use that computer. Now they go and log in on another computer. They'll hit a limit that we have in place for active licenses. And it's going to say, hey, do you want me to disable the other licenses so you can use it here? And the answer very likely is yes, I'd like you to do that, please. And so you can leave a trail of one license behind, and then the system will automatically recover that behind you. So you won't leave the machine doesn't have the license in it. It does go with the user. And
so James, just to reiterate for the audience, every license allows 2 logins, right?
Yes.
Is that correct? Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I mean, the one thing that is the slight exception to that is Acrobat Mobile, where if you're doing that on your phone, then that doesn't apply to the same, two licenses that James just applied there. That you could just log in on your phone.
And I think it's the same in the Creative Cloud, right? It's same with Creative Cloud. If you're on desktop, it's all about the desktop. It's the 2, but if you're using any kind of mobile app, it doesn't count, right? Is that correct, guys? Count. I just want to make sure. Yeah. Okay.
That is correct.
Great. Thank you, guys. Okay. Here's one about Active Directory. Can you create groups in Active Directory?
What kind of groups? Sure. Well, if you're an admin and you have the right to create groups in Active Directory, yes, you can. So I think the question might be about creating groups on the Adobe side. We do have a tool that does allow us to sync an Azure Active Directory with Adobe's licensing services. We call it an Azure Active Directory Sync Connector. And with that, you can specify specific groups that you want to move over to Adobe, that you want to sync with Adobe. And then your authority for users and groups becomes that Azure Active Directory instance. Once those named users have moved into Adobe, then you can attach licenses to them. So you want to give them all access to Acrobat, you want to give them access to Sign. You can do that on the Adobe side, but you don't have to do any work to keep the users and groups themselves in sync, because that will be handled by that synchronization software.
Got it. Thank you. Oh, we have a question about InDesign that just came in. My team uses InDesign to create model plans. These documents have to be shared with multiple people across divisions. Is there a way for seamless collaboration with Adobe and SharePoint? Do they don't want to have to upload and download the package every time?
So I can take that question if you want. So there's a couple of ways that you can approach that, and it somewhat depends on whether you're using, for example, OneDrive on your desktop computer, where you could be saving those InDesign files on there, and it's synchronizing into OneDrive or SharePoint, because OneDrive also connects into SharePoint as well. So that's one way you could do it. Another way that you can also do it is using things like, if you're using your Creative Cloud assets, you could use Power Automate to synchronize between files that you have inside of SharePoint and Creative Cloud assets to go back and forth there. Now, in general, I would say for most day-to-day stuff, using like OneDrive makes the most sense there. But if you're like working on it in the context of things that aren't necessarily like the same user, maybe you're publishing it to like a separate SharePoint site that's like for the published assets or things like that, then the Power Automate option could be a good option there.
Here's one that came in. With our named user license, with our NUL named user license, can the user move anywhere on any machine as long as he or she isn't logged into more than 2?
Yes. So, well, I'm going to put an asterisk on that. So long as, one, the software is installed on the computer, or they have a way to do that. And then 2, so long as that computer can access our licensing services. And you say, well, why wouldn't they be able to? If you're in a tightly controlled network, if you're in like a government network that has a very small or non-existent access to the internet, then that might cause an issue. So outside of that situation, you should be able to go to any computer that has Adobe Acrobat or Creative Cloud installed and then sign in on that machine.
So I'm going to say one caveat, James, if you don't mind.
You go
so
for it.
with documentcloud.adobe.com, you don't have to actually have the software on the machine. And, you know, if you need to create a PDF or export a PDF or any one of those verbs, if you want to call it, right, it's the PDF services, you could walk up to anybody's computer. You could be over at a friend's house, right, and say, I got to get online, log in as yourself, and going through the browser, that machine doesn't actually need the apps. Now, clearly, I know for creative, we've got to have it there, but I just want to make sure the audience was aware that you don't always have to have the app there, especially if you're going to work in the .cloud environment. And the integrations with Microsoft, I mean, it's the same thing, right? I don't know, Ben, if you want to just clarify for me, if I just go to SharePoint and I have the add-ins, which we've got the link there on the screen in there, again, I don't need anything on the computer other than SharePoint, and it'll do all that for me because I'm logged in, right?
Yeah, actually, that's one of the really cool benefits, is that for a lot of those common types of things that you do with PDFs, like converting documents from like Word or PowerPoint or things like that to PDF, or exporting them back into those file formats, or combining them all into like one PDF. One of the great things about things like the SharePoint integration is that you don't actually have to leave SharePoint. You could be logged in within your web browser. You just select those files, and if you use the Adobe Document Cloud for SharePoint add-in, then you can just select those, say combine, and combine them, and it stays all in the cloud, and then stores those back into things like SharePoint. We also have actually there, Lori, the components into the Office application. So even if you're using like Word online or on the desktop, you actually can have that button right in there to be able to do some of those actions like creating that PDF directly inside of those Office applications too.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so the links here on the screen, if you guys are looking under the resources and call to action, it's the second one from the top, shows you all the helps you get to the integrations, the documentation for it, adding the add-ins in your, your Microsoft console.
And I think one of the things that's also very interesting about that is that certainly as everybody's starting to bring more and more of Microsoft's 365 into their life and how they're working more and more with teams, working more and more, maybe not just with the desktop software on their computer, but also online and on mobile apps and stuff like that. One of the great things is that you can take a lot of the stuff that you love about Adobe products and be able to do it directly within those, whether it's on desktop or online. In fact, we've even been doing that with things like Creative Cloud too.
Excellent. Thank you all. Okay. Pretty sure this is a follow-up question to the one that was just asked. We're on an ETLA. Good. Which allows users to log into Acrobat on 2 computers. However, certain users use 3 or more. Is there any possibility in allowing that without having the need to log off on one of the logged in PCs?
Lori, you want to handle that one?
I'm just going to say no. The answer is pretty straightforward. It's no. I think 2 is 2 is 2. Okay. And then unfortunately,
yep.
And that's just the way it is. So I don't know, Garrett, if you've got another question, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay, here's a site license question. Love site licenses. We deployed Acrobat enterprise-wide. Yay. Do we have to ask every user to create an account and sign in, question mark? Do we prefer the installation auto sign in and ready for the users?
So there's actually 2 questions there. There's a question about, do we have to ask the user to create an account? That's one. And then do we have to ask them to sign in? So the creating an account, you can do that on behalf of your end users. So in the enterprise situation, it's very likely that you're going to do a federated login with all of our the work that we've been doing over the last 5 or 6 years with customers. The vast majority of our enterprise customers choose a federated login. So they want to connect their existing identity provider, consistent experience across the board for software that they're using. And so in more and more, we're seeing customers using Azure Active Directory, as we talked about before. And in that case, they'll be logging in with their Azure AD credentials. We will have established that sync ahead of time, so the users that will have access to the software will already be in the Adobe system, ready to go. So when the user steps up to Office and they want to use Acrobat and says log in, they just sign in with their credentials from the company, and there they are, right, using their federated login, which is fantastic. So yes, they need to log in. We've talked about that in another question, but in terms of the end user creating their own account, they don't have to do that. You can do that on their behalf.
Okay,
and
I think
that's how they're going to get the license.
Good point. And I think you answered the second part of that question too. We prefer the installation auto signs in and ready for the user. So with Active Directory, it would already automatically provision the user with a license.
It provisions the user for the license, but they still have to sign in. So that's actually an interesting question, because it kind of goes back to the earlier question. We've got our people signing in to the machine, and then we also sign in to Acrobat. And again, the answer is still the same. You're signing into the machine for access to Microsoft tools and services, and then when you sign into Acrobat, you're getting to that part of Adobe's tools and services. So you do need the 2 logins.
Got it. Okay, I think that we answered this question earlier, but maybe just to reiterate, I am in the process of moving to named user licenses using Azure Active Directory. is there a way to sync groups? I was able to sync all users, but the groups did not come over. Is this something which can be automated?
Why, yes. I'm curious about that because it sounds like that there may have been a configuration issue if you use our built-in Azure Active Directory sync tool, and what that will do as you go through the setup process, it will ask, oh, we detect these groups. Do you want to bring these groups over? So my guess is what's happened is that has been missed. If you're using another method, so maybe you're using a method that uses, say, a CSV to do the sync, or you're using the user sync tool that my team develops and deploys, you do need to configure it specifically to look for groups by name, specific named groups that you're looking for, so that those will be picked up on the Microsoft side and then synchronized on the Adobe side. So there is a setup that you've got to do, but once you've done that, it should then pick up the membership in those groups. If the question is about, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I know, I was just saying, you and I have talked about this a few times. The Azure AD Sync environment that we have between Azure and our admin console for managing the Adobe apps is really quite simplified, right? It's just, it's just like, if you've got everything set up on the Microsoft side, boom, it's just, it's easy peasy, right? I think that I just want to make sure you kind of outline that a little bit before you jump onto the second thing you were going to say. Just how it's easier versus some of the other methodologies that are out there.
So if you haven't set up a sync or connection to Adobe yet, and this is that's the lead in. You've got to make sure you haven't done it yet. Then when you create a new directory, you'll be given the option, do you want to use Azure Active Directory? That's a choice. And there's a couple of other choices. There's a Google directory that you could choose. A lot of our education customers use that. And then there's a third one that says, I want to use a different SAML provider. So those are your choices when you talk about federation. The Azure Active Directory is the big one at the beginning, and most folks are clicking that button now because it's so crazy simple. Having selected that, it's going to ask you to log in to your Azure Active Directory instance. So you have to log into Azure at that point with your Azure credentials, and that user will have to have access to read the directory. So once you log in as an admin over there, you'll have access to the content of the directory, and you can then pick those users, the groups that you're interested in. It's always based on groups. So you pick the security groups that you're interested in. I want those to sync, start the sync process, and it will replicate those groups over on the Adobe side by magic. It works great. And that whole tool is actually getting I don't want to say a facelift because that's not right. It's getting a whole new rev soon. So by the end of November, we should see a whole new rev on that. And what it will allow you to do, if you've chosen the third option, which says other SAML provider, and you've gone and picked, say, ADFS at that point, which is also very common to do, but you didn't set it up as an Azure Active Directory sync. What you can later do is there'll be a button that will say, oh, we see that this is Azure Active Directory. Would you like us to sync the users? And then it will take you through that process of setting up the sync. That's very cool. So a lot of customers have been waiting for that feature so that they could convert their existing ADFS federation over to an Azure Active Directory sync, and we can do that in November. So look for that change from us. I'm pretty excited about it.
Excellent. We got someone, I think you sparked a question. Someone's calling us out here, but it's a really good question. Has there been any progress or internal discussion about making sign-in to Adobe products a true single sign-on experience? Most products on the market offer this user experience.
I'm not a product manager. Has there been thought about it? Yes, there's been a lot of internal discussion about this question. At the moment, we do not offer the ability to do IDP-initiated login, which is what you're looking for. And that would create that ability to make a landing page, for instance, in your infrastructure or in your intranet, and then click on it and have it magically log into Adobe, right? We don't support that IDP-initiated login today. Doesn't mean we won't do it, but right now that is not something that is available.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, here's one about PDF services. Yay, PDF services, it's what allows us to connect to apps like Office 365 or Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Dynamics, all that good stuff. Can you cut off PDF services to avoid people storing level 1 data in the cloud?
Yes, you can. But you have to be an admin to configure what we call our product profile in the admin console. So you go to the Adobe admin console and you can see your Acrobat DC product that's sitting there. You can create what we call product profiles. And those product profiles, you can enable or disable switches that may be there as part of the product. Some products have more switches than others. Acrobat has one switch and it says PDF services on it. So if you create a product profile of Acrobat and call it Acrobat DC-no services, we recommend that you give it a name that makes sense. Then you'd have to make sure that you disable the thing called PDF services. Know that that will cause, it will make it so that you can't use the things that Ben was talking about earlier with that integration inside of SharePoint and OneDrive and talking to Power Automate and so on. So you want to you need to be thinking carefully about that choice as to whether you do want to disable those services elsewhere in your infrastructure. But anybody who has that product profile will now no longer have access to Adobe PDF services.
You know what, James? Oh, go ahead, Ben. Sorry, go ahead.
Although one thing that you might want to consider and think about is also maybe also finessing some of the stuff with the customization wizard as well, of some of the things that you might want to have as options inside of Acrobat versus when you're using it inside of like SharePoint and things like that. Because one of the things that we built into things like the SharePoint integration is that it's actually transient document when it does that. When you click to create or combine PDFs through the SharePoint integration, it does go into our services, which is, encrypts at rest and in motion, all that fun stuff. But when it comes back, it's transient and it only stays within our service for that 24 hours as it's generating that and bringing it back into SharePoint. So, when you're looking at wanting to use some of those services as it relates to SharePoint or things like that, those services can push those documents back into there. And I recognize that there's always those concerns of, oh, do we need to store stuff in another cloud? Well, this helps give you some of those benefits of being able to use that while also using it within the Microsoft ecosystem there. So combination of customization wizard in Acrobat, you could add or remove some of the functions that you might want to make available within Acrobat while still being able to use some of those services within your cloud services.
And all of that's documented on the third link on the page, the admin console docs. All that's documented there. I would say if this is something you have to do, bookmark that and it'll show you everything that James was talking about, as well as how what Ben was talking about with the customization wizard.
Got it. Okay, I'm getting flagged that we're almost at the end of this session. I have one more question. I think it'd be good to end on this one. Does the Adobe admin console show the last time a user logged in and which product was used? If so, where can I find the last login time? And if not, are there plans to add this information to the admin console?
Currently, the answer is no. However, the best place to look is in your IDP logs. This is what we're recommending to our customers, and they've found great success there. So they can see every login because it's recorded in the SAML trace or in the IDP logs. Is this something that we plan to do? I can say that we have a lot of people asking for this feature, and we are thinking hard about it.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, well, I think that's going to wrap us up. Lori, James, Ben, thank you for joining us this evening. I guess have a great rest of your days or evenings from wherever you're dialing in. If you have any further questions, please connect with any of us on LinkedIn. We're very active there. You can check out some of these resources or maybe join some of our other events during the conference. So with that being said, thank you for your participation and thank you to our presenters, and have a great rest of your evenings.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Good morning.